Imagine waking up one morning from unsettling dreams, only to discover that your body is no longer your own. You are lying on your back. It feels hard, like thick, heavy armor. You lift your head and see a brown, domed belly divided by rigid arches. And your legs. You have so many legs now, pitifully thin compared to the rest of you, waving helplessly before your eyes. What is your first thought? In most horror stories, this is the moment of screaming. This is the moment you question your sanity, or the fabric of the universe, or the existence of a merciful God. But if you are Gregor Samsa, the protagonist of Franz Kafka's most famous story, your first thought is not about the absolute impossibility of your monstrous transformation. Your first thought is a profound, soul-crushing panic about missing your early morning train to work. The most frightening thing about the Metamorphosis is not the moment when Gregor Samsa wakes up as a monstrous insect. It is the fact that his first thoughts are entirely consumed by his job. He worries about the 5 o'clock train. He worries about his demanding boss. He worries about the massive financial debt his parents owe to his employer. In other words, he has been turned into something terrible, something out of a nightmare, and the most urgent thing in his mind is still whether he can be a good, reliable employee. He looks at his hard shell, his waving antennae, and thinks, what a grueling job I have picked, day in, day out on the road. The trouble with trains, the bad food, the temporary human connections. He is entirely disconnected from the miracle and the horror of his own existence, focusing instead on the tyranny of the alarm clock ticking on his bedside table. This is where we begin our journey into one of the most haunting, misunderstood, and fiercely debated works of literature ever written. Published in 1915, The Metamorphosis is a novella that has infected the cultural imagination. It gave us the very word, Kafkaesque. But what does that really mean? Most people think of Kafkaesque as referring to a labyrinth of bureaucracy, a faceless government, or a senseless legal system. But this story is much more intimate than that. It is a horror story about the family. It is a story about work, dependence, conditional love, and what happens to that love when the person you care about stops being useful. It asks a question most people are terrified to say out loud. What is a family member actually worth when he can no longer give anything back? The story begins with one of the most famous sentences in modern literature, and it gives away the entire premise at once. There is no build-up, no explanation, no magical warning, and no wizard casting a dark spell. A traveling salesman goes to bed as an ordinary man and wakes up as something his family will later call a creature. The horror is not that this happened. The horror is what everyone decides to do about it. Gregor Samsa lives in a modest, cramped apartment with his father, his mother, and his younger sister Grete. He works as a traveling salesman, dealing in cloth, a job he absolutely hates because his father's business failed 5 years ago and left the family in crushing debt. Since then, Gregor has been carrying that debt quietly, paying it down with his own youth and exhaustion. The opening line lands on a morning like any other, except that the rain is hitting the window pane, and he has overslept. He tries to roll over onto his right side, which is his normal sleeping position, but his curved shell simply rocks him back onto his back. He notices that he cannot control his new legs. When he tries to bend one, it stretches out straight. When he finally gets it to do what he wants, the other legs swing about in painful, uncontrolled agitation. He is trapped in a body that refuses to obey his mind. And yet, his mind remains entirely human. At first, he assumes it is a temporary illness, a bad dream, something that will simply pass if he only forces himself to move and get out of bed. He thinks about his schedule, the people waiting for him at the office, the samples of cloth he needs to pack. His room is still his room, with the familiar desk, the fabric samples scattered about, and the picture he cut out of a magazine showing a beautiful woman wearing a fur hat and a fur boa. But the body inside that room is no longer familiar. But here is the first major misconception we must clear up. If you ask anyone what Gregor Samsa turns into, they will almost always say a cockroach, or perhaps a giant beetle. Pop culture has cemented this specific image in our minds. But Kafka never wrote the word cockroach. In fact, he explicitly forbade his publisher from drawing a specific insect on the cover of the first edition of the book. He wrote in a letter that the insect itself cannot be depicted. It cannot even be shown from a distance. So what word did Kafka actually use? In the original German text, the first sentence says, Gregor was transformed into a monstrous Ungeziefer. Ungeziefer is a fascinating, deeply unsettling word. It does not mean a specific biological insect with a scientific name. In Middle High German, the root of the word referred to an unclean animal that is unfit for a religious sacrifice. Over the centuries, it came to mean vermin. It means a creeping, crawling thing that is unwanted, a pest that should be exterminated. Some translators choose the word insect, some choose bug, but the precision of Kafka is in his absolute imprecision. By using the word Ungeziefer, Kafka is not giving us a zoological fact, he is giving us a social status. Gregor has not just changed his physical shape, he has been fundamentally reclassified by the universe as something repulsive and unworthy of existence. The word itself dehumanizes him before his family even sees him. He has crossed into a category of living things that has zero human sympathy attached to it. Now let us return to the tension of that fateful morning. The outside world is about to intrude. His mother knocks softly on the door. "Gregor," she calls out, "it is 7:15. Did you not want to go somewhere?" When Gregor answers, something is terribly wrong. He hears his own words in his head, but the sound that comes out of his throat is no longer a human voice. It is a thin, pained, irrepressible animal, squeaking, mixed with words no one can clearly understand. That is the first great split in the story. Inside, he is still Gregor, full of plans and memories and deep anxiety about his job. Outside, he has become something that cannot even say its own name. The physical loss of his voice is a crucial mechanism of his isolation. When he loses the ability to speak clearly, his family assumes he has lost the ability to think. Because they hear an animal hissing and squeaking, they stop treating him as a conscious being. This is a profound observation about how society treats those who cannot communicate in ways the majority finds acceptable. The moment language breaks down, empathy vanishes. The family will soon begin talking about him in the third person while he is sitting right there in the room. They strip him of his personhood long before his heart actually stops beating. The panic in the apartment escalates. His father thumps on one of the side doors with his fist, his voice deep and demanding. His sister Greta whispers through the other door, asking if he is unwell, asking if he needs anything. Gregor tries to keep his answers incredibly short, hoping to mask the terrible change in his voice. He is still trying to manage their feelings, even as he struggles to lift his heavy armored body out of the bed, risking severe injury to his head by letting himself fall to the carpet. His primary motivation is to avoid embarrassing his parents. The situation reaches a boiling point with the ring of the apartment doorbell. It is the chief clerk from Gregor's firm. The manager has come personally to the apartment to find out why Gregor missed the early train. Stop and think about the sheer cruelty of this dynamic. A man is an hour and a half late for work, just once in 5 long years of perfect attendance, and the company immediately sends a high-ranking manager to his home to interrogate him. This reveals the brutal, unforgiving nature of the capitalist machine Gregor is caught in. The manager stands in the living room, speaking loudly through the closed bedroom door, questioning Gregor's dedication, hinting that his recent sales have been poor, and outright threatening his employment. He suggests that Gregor might be stealing company money. The injustice of this accusation infuriates Gregor. Driven by absolute desperation to save his job and protect his family from financial ruin, he throws himself onto the floor with a loud thud. He manages to upright himself on his many thin legs. Then begins the excruciating task of turning the key in the lock. Because he has no hands, he has to grip the metal key with his jaws. He injures himself doing this. A brown, viscous liquid drips from his mouth onto the key and falls to the floor, but he finally clicks the lock open. The heavy wooden door swings wide. That moment at the threshold is the turning point of the entire novella. The doorway permanently separates the human household from the space where Gregor will be kept for the rest of his short life. The reaction of the humans is instantaneous and catastrophic. The manager takes one look, claps his hand over his open mouth, stumbles backward, and flees down the apartment stairs in absolute terror. Gregor's mother takes a step toward him, then collapses completely into the skirts of her dress, fainting on the floor. But it is the father's reaction that sets the tone for everything that follows. The father does not try to understand. He weeps for a brief moment, and then he clenches his fist with a hostile expression. Grabbing the manager's forgotten walking stick in one hand and rolling up a newspaper in the other, the father begins stamping his heavy feet and hissing like a savage beast, driving Gregor back toward the bedroom. Gregor is not used to walking backwards. His many legs get tangled. He gets stuck in the doorway, his broad armored body too wide to fit through easily. One of his flanks is scraped raw, leaving dark, ugly stains on the white door frame. The father gives him a powerful, violent shove from behind, sending him bleeding and flying far into the dark room. The door is slammed shut with the walking stick, and then there is only silence. From this point on, Gregor is inside a room, behind a door, and most of his contact with his family happens through that barrier. He hears their hushed voices through the wood. He receives his meals pushed quickly across the floor. The door becomes the solid, undeniable line between the person he remembers being and the thing the world now sees. When Gregor wakes up at twilight from his exhausted sleep, his side is scarred and deeply painful. He smells something enticing. His youngest sister, Greta, has bravely crept into the room and left a bowl of fresh milk with small pieces of white bread floating in it. Milk had always been his favorite drink as a human, but when he dips his head into the bowl, he is instantly repulsed. The taste is awful to him. His human layers are peeling away, leaving only base survival instincts. The next morning, Greta realizes he has not touched the milk. Overcoming her own deep physical disgust, She brings him an assortment of scraps to see what he will tolerate. She brings old, half-rotten vegetables, bones left over from the evening meal, covered in congealed white sauce, some raisins and almonds, and a piece of cheese that Gregor had previously declared entirely inedible. To his great delight, he falls upon the rotting food, tearing into the cheese and the vegetables with tears of satisfaction in his eyes. At first, Greta seems tender. She becomes his sole caretaker. But a grim routine quickly settles over the apartment. Gregor spends his days and long nights pacing the floor, listening to his family talk through the walls. And it is here that we must examine the specific social mechanism Kafka uses to drive the tragedy. We have to look at the household ledger. We have to look at the money. While Gregor is starving and hiding in his room, the household gathers to discuss their finances. Through the wall, Gregor learns a shocking truth. The family financial situation is not nearly as dire as he had been led to believe. When the father-owned business collapsed, he had secretly saved a small amount of money from the ruins. Furthermore, Gregor had been bringing home more salary than they immediately needed, and the father had been quietly tucking that extra money away as well. Hearing this, you might expect Gregor to feel betrayed. He has sacrificed his youth, his happiness, and his romantic prospects to pay off a debt that was not as urgent as he thought. But Gregor feels no anger. Even as a repulsive bug, his primary emotion is incredible pride that he was able to provide such a comfortable life for his parents and his sister. He only feels love. But this financial revelation changes the entire dynamic of the household. The savings are not enough to live on forever. So, the family must go to work. The father, who had supposedly been too old and weak to work for 5 years, takes a job as a bank messenger. The mother begins sewing fine underwear for a local fashion shop, ruining her eyesight late into the night. Grete takes a job as a salesgirl and studies French and shorthand in the evenings, hoping to get a better position. This is the second, quiet transformation in the novella. Gregor does not change from an insect back into a man, but the family changes from dependents into workers. This is the exact mechanism of conditional love. Kafka is incredibly precise about the money, the debt, the salary, the savings, the jobs. The Metamorphosis is not a fairy tale where poverty is just an abstract concept. It is a strict ledger. Gregor's worth to his family was entirely measured in his monthly payments. The exact moment he stops paying, he becomes a cost. His existence shifts from an asset to a liability. Once they realize they can survive without his money, they begin to see him not as a tragic victim, but as a problem. As the weeks pass, Gregor actively participates in his own erasure. Whenever Grete enters the room to clean or bring the rotten food, Gregor hides himself completely under the sofa. He realizes that his mere appearance causes her distress. So, he spends hours adjusting a white sheet over the sofa, ensuring that not even a single antenna sticks out to offend her eyes. He accepts that his existence is a trauma to the people he loves. Let us pause and think about the psychological weight of this action. What does it mean to love someone so much that you agree you are entirely unlovable? What does it mean to actively participate in your own disappearance just to make your family comfortable? He tries to be polite. He tries to be invisible. Even after his body has betrayed him, his deepest instinct is still to manage the feelings of other people. But this fragile peace is shattered by the terrible incident with the furniture. Gregor has taken to climbing the walls and the ceiling to entertain himself. He likes hanging upside down. It brings a slight physical relief to his heavy body. Grete notices the sticky trails he leaves behind on the wallpaper and decides she should clear out his room so he has more space to crawl. She enlists the mother to help move the heavy wooden chest of drawers and the heavy writing desk. She is trying to help, but her help is built on a quiet, devastating assumption. She assumes the man is gone forever. She is optimizing the room for an insect. But as the women begin emptying the room, pushing and pulling the heavy wood across the floor, Gregor has a sudden, terrible realization. They are not just giving him space. They are stripping away his humanity. They are clearing out his past. He listens to his mother softly arguing that perhaps they should leave the room exactly as it was. The mother says that if they take the furniture away, it is like showing Gregor that they have given up all hope of his recovery. But the mother's resistance is weak, and Grete overrides her. As they remove the desk where he did his homework as a young boy, Gregor panics. He breaks out from under the sofa, while the women are in the living room catching their breath. He scurries frantically up the wall to save the one thing he can easily reach. He finds the framed picture he cut out of a magazine showing the lady wrapped in a fur boa and a fur hat. He presses his hot, sticky belly against the cold glass of the picture, determined that no one will take this away from him. It is not just a picture. It is his absolute last grasp at human desire, at art, at memory, at connection to the outside world. When his mother walks back into the room and looks up at the floral wallpaper, she does not see her son protecting a memory. She sees a giant, brown, segmented monstrosity clinging to the wall. She screams, falls back onto the sofa, and faints dead away. Greta rushes in, furious. "You, Gregor," she yells, raising her fist in anger. It is the first time she has spoken directly to him since the change. She runs into the living room to get medicine to wake the mother. Gregor, wanting to help, scurries out of the bedroom after her. When Grete turns around, his hideous face startles her. She drops a medicine bottle. A sharp shard of glass cuts Gregor's face. In the middle of this absolute chaos, the father returns home from his new job at the bank. He comes in, wearing a tight blue uniform with bright gold buttons. But he is not the tired, broken, pathetic man Gregor remembers from the last 5 years. The necessity of work has revived his authority. He looks imposing, angry, and dangerous. Greta tells him that Gregor has broken loose and frightened the mother. The father immediately misunderstands the situation. He assumes Gregor has committed some deliberate act of violence. He begins chasing Gregor around the living room. But the father's new boots are heavy and he is clumsy. Realizing he cannot easily catch the scurrying insect, the father stops and begins raiding the fruit bowl on the dining sideboard. He starts throwing apples at Gregor. These are not soft, warning tosses. He is pitching them with lethal, focused force. One small apple grazes Gregor's back, but slides off his hard shell unharmed. But the next one hits its mark perfectly. It strikes Gregor square in the back and sinks incredibly deep into his soft, vulnerable flesh. The pain is blinding. It feels like the entire world is tearing apart. The red apple is lodged firmly in his back, creating a massive rotting wound. Gregor loses consciousness, just as his mother, bursting from the bedroom in her undergarments, runs to the father, throws her arms around his neck, and begs for her son's life. The apple is one of Kafka's most famous and debated images. It works on several levels at once. It is an ordinary piece of fruit from an ordinary middle-class living room, making the violence domestic and familiar. It echoes the biblical apple of knowledge, marking a permanent fall from innocence and the breaking of the family covenant. But we must not let it become just a clean literary metaphor. It is a physical, dirty wound. It stays stuck in his flesh for the rest of the story. It gathers dust. It causes constant, agonizing pain. The father anger is not mythical. It is the exhausted, disgusted rage of a man who has been frightened in his own home and wants to assert dominance over a parasite. After the apple attack, we enter the final, most agonizing phase of the story. Gregor survives, but he is permanently disabled. The apple remains stuck in him because no one in the family is brave enough or cares enough to pull it out. He can no longer climb the walls. He can barely drag his heavy body across the floor. Because the family is entirely occupied with earning money, Gregor is neglected. The door is rarely opened. His room transitions from a bedroom into a garbage dump. They throw the ash bucket and random household trash in there with him. Grete, who once brought him food with care, now simply kicks some scraps into the room with her foot in the morning and sweeps them out at night, not caring if he is eaten at all. This brings us to the crucial role of the mother. She is often viewed by casual readers as the most sympathetic character, the one who begs for his life and wants to keep his furniture. But her love is entirely ineffectual, and her weakness is a form of active betrayal. She cannot look at him without fainting. She loves the memory of Gregor, the human son, but she completely and utterly rejects the reality of Gregor the insect. By constantly fainting and crying, she forces Gret and the father to deal with the harsh reality of the situation. Her silence and her weakness provide the cover for their cruelty. She allows the abuse to happen while maintaining her own supposed innocence. Many people in society do not actively choose cruelty. They simply fail to interrupt it. To make ends meet, the family takes a drastic step. They rent out one of the bedrooms to 3 severe bearded gentlemen. These lodgers demand absolute cleanliness and order. They bring their own furniture and insist on being served meals in the living room, while the family is relegated to eating in the kitchen. Here, Kafka provides a brilliant, dark mirror to the family behavior. Notice how the father, the mother, and Gret bowl and scrape to these 3 rude strangers. The family treats the lodgers with absolute subservience, terrified of offending them, desperate for their rent money. They give the lodgers the respect, the clean space, and the careful attention that they have entirely stripped away from their own son. The lodgers represent the ultimate transactional relationship. As long as they pay, they are masters of the house. Gregor cannot pay, so he is locked in the dark with the garbage. But one evening, a delicate and terrible thing happens. The lodgers hear Greta practicing her violin in the kitchen. They invite her to play for them in the living room. The family obliges, eager to please. As Grete plays, the beautiful music drifts through the slight crack in Gregor's door. The lodgers seem quickly bored by the performance, blowing thick cigar smoke into the air and whispering to each other. But Gregor is absolutely mesmerized. Drawn by the sound, Gregor forgets his hideous appearance. He forgets the dust covering his body and the rotting apple stuck in his back. He creeps slowly, painfully out of his room, his head covered in fluff and hair, and moves into the bright light of the living room. Was he an animal? That music could move him so, Kafka writes. Gregor envisions a beautiful fantasy where he crawls up to Greta, pulls her into his room, guards her from the cruel world, and tells her about his old, secret plan to send her to the musical conservatory. Even now, even as a rotting insect, his deepest dream is to be the provider. The music promises a human connection, a bridge back to his soul. But reality crashes down with brutal speed. One of the lodgers spots Gregor crawling on the floor. He points a finger. The lodgers are not terrified so much as they are deeply offended by the lack of hygiene. They declare immediately that they are breaking their lease. They refuse to pay a single cent for the time they have stayed, and they threaten to sue the father for housing them in such unsanitary conditions. The family's last desperate financial arrangement collapses in an instant, simply because Gregor let himself be seen. It is at this exact moment that Gret turns to her parents and says the words that end the story in any moral sense. This is the moment of the pronoun shift. I want you to listen carefully to the language she uses. My dear parents, Greta says, things cannot go on like this. I will not utter my brother's name in the presence of this monster. We have to try and get rid of it. We have done everything humanly possible to take care of it and put up with it. No one can blame us in the least. Notice the word, it. She does not say him. She does not say Gregor. She says it. She argues that if this creature were really Gregor, it would have realized that human beings cannot live with such a beast, and it would have gone away on its own accord to spare them the burden. Because it has stayed, she argues, it is just a parasite trying to ruin them. This pronoun change is easy to miss, but it is the quiet, devastating engine of the entire tragedy. Once a person becomes an it, the moral question of how to treat them simply disappears. You do not love an it. You do not feed an it out of tenderness. You manage an it. You contain an it. You contain an it. Or, when it becomes too expensive, you exterminate an it. By stripping away his identity, Grete justifies his execution. The mother coughs into her hand and offers no resistance. The father vigorously agrees. Gregor hears every single word of this verdict. He does not argue, because he cannot speak. He understands perfectly that he is no longer wanted, and in his tragic, infinite guilt, he actually agrees with them. He manages to slowly, painfully, turn his broken body around. He drags himself back into his dark room. As soon as he crosses the threshold, Greta slams the door shut behind him and throws the heavy bolt lock. In the total darkness, Gregor feels his remaining strength leaving his body. He thinks back on his family with deep emotion and pure love. His conviction that he must disappear is even more definite than his sister. He feels no anger at their betrayal. And as the church clock outside the window strikes 3 in the morning, he breathes his last breath. His head sinks gently to the floor. He dies of starvation, infection, and perhaps a terrible kind of relief. Kafka does not give Gregor a heroic death. There is no spiritual transcendence. His body is treated like a piece of trash. The next morning, the old charwoman, a tough, unsentimental cleaning lady they hired for the heavy work, discovers his dry, empty husk. She pokes it roughly with a broom to see if it will move. When it does not, she calls out to the family. "Come look at this," she says. "It is dead. It is lying there, dead as a doornail." And how does the family react to the death of their son and brother? They do not weep. They do not fall to their knees in grief. The father crosses himself. He says, "Well, now we can thank God." He marches out into the living room and violently kicks the three lodgers out of the apartment with a massive surge of newfound confidence. The charwoman later announces with a cheerful impatience that the body has been thrown out and disposed of. The family sits down at the table and writes 3 letters of excuse to their respective employers, taking the day off. And then, for the first time in many long, grueling months, they leave the apartment together. They take a tram ride out to the open country. The sun is shining warmly through the windows of the tram car. They sit back in their comfortable seats and discuss their financial prospects, realizing that their combined salaries are actually quite good. They plan to move to a smaller, cheaper, better located apartment. And as they talk, the parents notice a remarkable change in Gret. Despite the horrors of the past year, she has bloomed into a beautiful, voluptuous young woman. The novella ends with Gret standing up in the tram and stretching her young body. The parents smile, thinking it is time to find her a good husband. This ending disturbs readers more than any insect body ever could. It is sunny, hopeful, and entirely ruthless. It suggests that Gregor truly was a burden, and his death liberated them. The machine of society marches on, completely unbothered by the crushing of a single, insignificant life. The world offers its beautiful, warm renewal to the people who survived, not to the one who was sacrificed. This is the true tragedy of Kafka vision. The horror is not that the universe is cruel, but that the universe is utterly and completely indifferent. How are we supposed to make sense of a story this dark? For over a century, scholars have tried to crack the metamorphosis like a secret code. Some view it through a Freudian lens, seeing Gregor's transformation as an expression of his repressed guilt and his subconscious desire to overthrow the father. By becoming a helpless bug, he forces his father to become the strong man of the house again. The apple penetrating his flesh is seen as a symbol of the father, violent reassertion of patriarchal dominance. Others read it as a pure Marxist critique of capitalism. Gregor is the ultimate alienated worker. He is reduced to an insect by a system that demands blind obedience and endless travel, separating him from the products of his labor and from genuine human connection. When he can no longer produce capital, he is literally treated like vermin and tossed into the garbage. His physical transformation merely makes visible what the economic system has already done to his soul. Existentialist philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus saw Gregor's fate as the ultimate expression of the absurd. The universe has no intrinsic meaning. A man can wake up as a bug for absolutely no reason, and there is no God coming down through the clouds to explain the lesson. You simply have to deal with the reality in front of you. Gregor, failure, in the existential view, is that he never rebels against his condition. He just accepts it, constantly apologizing to the very people who are locking him in the dark. And some recent readers see the story as a powerful, devastating account of chronic illness and disability. A family member becomes housebound, unable to work, unable to speak clearly, dependent on others for basic bodily needs. The family starts with care, but slowly moves into deep resentment. They stop seeing the person and only see the burden. The sick person begins to hide, to apologize, to feel that their mere existence is an inconvenience. Anyone who has been seriously ill or cared for someone seriously ill for years recognizes the brutal, uncomfortable honesty of these scenes. But the true genius of Kafka is that the story resists all of these narrow interpretations while inviting every single one of them. The Metamorphosis is a perfect mirror. It reflects the deep anxieties of whoever is reading it. If you are afraid of your family, it is a story about domestic abuse. If you hate your job, it is a story about corporate burnout. If you are chronically ill, it is a story about the loss of dignity. Kafka built a nightmare so structurally perfect that it can hold whatever fear you pour into it. To understand where this nightmare came from, we must look at the man who wrote it. Franz Kafka wrote this story in the autumn of 1912, when he was just 29 years old. He lived in a cramped apartment in Prague with his parents and sisters. He worked at an insurance institute, a day job he despised, investigating industrial accidents where workers' fingers and limbs were mangled by factory machines. He saw firsthand how human bodies were broken by industry and then discarded by the system over tiny compensation disputes. But his deepest wound was closer to home. It was his relationship with his father, Hermann Kafka. Hermann was a massive, loud, overbearing, self-made businessman who viewed his sensitive, literary, physically fragile son with profound disappointment. Kafka once wrote a letter to his father, a letter over 100 pages long that he never had the courage to actually deliver. In it, he detailed the emotional abuse and the crushing sense of inadequacy he felt living in his father's shadow. Kafka felt that he was nothing in his father's eyes. He felt like an insect. Writing. The Metamorphosis was not just a flight of fantasy. It was an act of brutal emotional realism. He was taking the internal psychological state of his own existence and making it a physical reality on the page. Interestingly, when Kafka first read the opening chapter aloud to his friends in Prague, he did not read it like a grim, solemn tragedy. His friend Max Brod recorded that Kafka was laughing so hard he frequently had to stop reading to catch his breath. He saw the dark, absurd comedy in the situation. A man turns into a giant, waving bug, and his biggest concern is what his boss will think. It is the ultimate joke about the human condition. We are so utterly trapped in our routines, our debts, and our societal expectations that we cannot even recognize the absurdity of our own existence. The humor is not slapstick. It is the nervous, terrifying laughter of recognizing something undeniably true about ourselves. Kafka died of tuberculosis in 1924, just 9 years after publishing this story. He was relatively unknown, and on his deathbed, he famously begged his friend Max Brod to burn all of his unpublished manuscripts unread. Thankfully, Brod betrayed that final request, giving the world The Trial, The Castle, and a body of work that forever shaped modern literature. But The Metamorphosis stands entirely apart. It remains his most perfect, concentrated dose of nightmare. It compresses a lifetime of anxiety, labor, family tension, and illness into a single, impossible image. So, what can we take away from a story this relentlessly dark? The novella does not offer a neat moral lesson. It does not tell us to be kind to the disabled, or to resist capitalism, or to reconcile with our parents. It simply shows a family under immense pressure and forces us to watch. If there is a practical takeaway, it is to pay very close attention to the language we use when another human being becomes inconvenient. Notice the exact moment when a person becomes an it. Notice when care smoothly transitions into management. Notice when the feeling of relief permanently replaces the feeling of grief. Those shifts do not happen in Gothic castles or evil lairs. They happen in ordinary living rooms, around ordinary dining tables, every single day. The metamorphosis is not a warning from another dimension. It is a precise description of this one. It asks us to be a little less certain about what we would do if the person we loved most in the world woke up one morning as a heavy, immovable burden. Gregor Samsa teaches us that while our physical forms and our economic value might change in an instant, the deepest human tragedy is to look at ourselves through the unforgiving eyes of a world that has forgotten how to love.